The morning sun cast long shadows across Memorial Park as Maria Gonzalez pushed the empty swing back and forth, the creaking chains echoing the emptiness in her heart. 4 months ago, this same swing had been filled with the laughter of her 3-year-old granddaughter, Lily. Now, the little girl sat motionless on a nearby bench, her once bright brown eyes staring vacantly at the duck pond where she used to squeal with delight. "Mia, look," Maria whispered gently, pointing to a family of ducks gliding across the water. "Remember how you used to count them? 1, 2, 3... Her voice trailed off as Lily remained unresponsive, her tiny hands folded in her lap, her expression blank as a winter sky. It had been exactly 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days since Officer David Gonzalez, Maria's son, and Lily's beloved father had been killed in the line of duty. The details still haunted Maria's dreams. A routine traffic stop that went horribly wrong, a desperate criminal with nothing to lose, and split-second decisions that changed everything forever. In that moment, Maria hadn't just lost her son. She'd watched her granddaughter's spirit disappear entirely. The transformation had been devastating to witness. Lily, who had been an early talker with a vocabulary that amazed everyone, simply stopped speaking. The chattering toddler who used to narrate her entire day, "Abuela, look at the pretty butterfly. Daddy, can we get ice cream? I love you as much," had retreated into a silence so complete it felt like a physical wall. Dr. Patricia Morales, the child psychologist, had explained that selective mutism following trauma wasn't uncommon in children. "She's not choosing to be silent," the doctor had assured Maria during their weekly sessions. "Her mind is protecting itself the only way it knows how. We have to be patient and create safe spaces where she feels ready to engage with the world." Again, but patience felt impossible when Maria watched Lily methodically eat her breakfast without a word. When bedtime stories were met with empty stares, when even her favorite cartoon characters couldn't coax so much as a smile. The house that had once been filled with Lily's songs and questions now felt like a tomb. Maria's own grief was complicated by her responsibility for Lily. David's wife, Lily's mother, Carmen, had died 2 years earlier from cancer, making Maria the only family Lily had left. At 68, Maria had thought her child-rearing days were behind her. Now, she found herself trying to heal a broken little girl while her own heart was shattered into a million pieces. The therapist suggested maintaining routines, visiting familiar places, and giving Lily time to process her loss. Memorial Park had been David's favorite place to take his daughter. Every Saturday morning, father and daughter would arrive with a bag of breadcrumbs, and Lily would race ahead to the duck pond, her pigtails bouncing as she called out greetings to her feathered friends. "Daddy, the mama duck remembers me," she used to exclaim, clapping her hands as the ducks swam toward shore. David would laugh, scooping her up to sit on his shoulders so she could see better. "Of course she remembers you, Princessa. You're unforgettable." Now, Maria brought Lily to the same spot every Tuesday and Friday, hoping the familiar setting might unlock something in her granddaughter's traumatized mind. She'd tried everything the internet and well-meaning friends had suggested. Art therapy supplies that sat untouched, musical toys that gathered dust, even a small kitten that Lily had looked at once before turning away. The worst part was watching other families in the park. Maria saw fathers pushing their children on swings, heard the delighted screams of toddlers going down slides, witnessed the easy back-and-forth chatter between parents and children, and felt a pain so sharp it took her breath away. Other grandmothers would smile sympathetically, having heard about their tragedy through the tight-knit community, but their pity only made the isolation feel more complete. "She used to be so different," Maria would tell Dr. Morales during their sessions. "So full of life, so curious about everything. She'd ask me 100 questions before breakfast. Abuela, why is the sky blue? Where do butterflies sleep? Can I call Daddy at work? No. Nothing. She's like a little ghost. As silence had become its own presence in their lives, heavy and oppressive, Maria found herself talking constantly, just to fill the void, narrating everything she was doing, commenting on the weather, reading aloud from magazines, anything to combat the crushing quiet that had descended on their world. Friends and family members offered constant advice. Give her time. Children are resilient. She'll come around. But 4 months felt like 4 years, and Maria was beginning to fear that she'd lost not only her son, but her granddaughter. Too not to death, but to a grief so profound it had stolen her voice, her joy, her very essence. This morning felt different, though Maria couldn't quite put her finger on why. There was something in the air, an energy she hadn't sensed in months. As she scattered breadcrumbs near the pond's edge, she noticed Lily's head turn slightly her, eyes focusing on something in the distance. It was the first time in weeks that Lily had looked at anything with what might have been interest. Maria followed her granddaughter's gaze, but saw only the usual park scenery joggers on the path, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a mother pushing a stroller. Whatever had caught Lily's attention wasn't immediately obvious, but for the first time in months, Maria felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, their lives would change forever. She couldn't have imagined that healing would come in the form of 4 legs, brown eyes, and a heart that understood loss just as deeply as theirs did. All Maria knew was that today felt different, and after 4 months of darkness, different felt like a miracle waiting to happen. Officer Marcus Rodriguez had learned to read the subtle signs in his partner's behavior over the past 18 months, but this morning, Bruno was acting unlike anything he'd ever seen. The 70-pound German Shepherd walked with his usual alert posture, ears constantly scanning for sounds, nose testing every breeze for information. But there was something different in his gait, a purposefulness that went beyond their routine patrol. Marcus adjusted his radio and checked his watch. 9:47 a.m. They were making their second pass through Memorial Park, a route they'd walked hundreds of times since Bruno had finally been cleared for active duty. The partnership hadn't been easy to forge. When Bruno first arrived at the Phoenix Police Department, he was a broken warrior carrying invisible wounds that ran so deep. The German Shepherd had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as an explosive detection dog with Staff Sergeant Tommy Chun, a young Marine from San Diego, who treated Bruno more like a beloved brother than a working dog. Marcus had read the file. Bruno and Tommy were inseparable, legendary among their unit for their ability to detect IEDs that other teams missed. They'd saved countless lives together, moving through hostile territory with the kind of trust that only comes from depending on each other for survival. Then came the mission that changed everything. An improvised explosive device, hidden too well and detonated too close. Tommy Chun died instantly. Bruno survived, but the trauma ran deeper than his physical wounds. The military veterinarians said his injuries would heal, but they couldn't fix what the explosion had done to his spirit. When Bruno arrived at the police department, he was aggressive, unpredictable, and seemed to trust no one. Several officers tried working with him, but he would snap, growl, or simply shut down completely. The department was ready to retire him when Marcus volunteered for one last attempt. Marcus understood broken. 3 years earlier, his own partner, Officer Lisa Martinez, had been gunned down during a domestic violence call that went wrong. Marcus had been first through the door and watched helplessly as Lisa bled out on a stranger's kitchen floor. The department had offered counseling, time off, desk duty, everything except the one thing that might have actually helped. Another partner who understood what it meant to lose someone you trusted with your life. The first months with Bruno were a daily test of patience and determination. The dog would obey basic commands, but showed no enthusiasm, no spark. He performed his duties mechanically, like a robot going through programmed motions. During downtime, Bruno would retreat to the corner of his kennel and stare at nothing, his brown eyes holding depths of sadness that Marcus recognized from his own mirror. The breakthrough had come on a rainy Tuesday 6 months ago. Marcus was reviewing case files in the station when he heard whimpering from the kennel area. He found Bruno lying on his side, legs moving as if he were running, caught in what was clearly a nightmare. Without thinking, Marcus had entered the kennel and sat beside the trembling dog, speaking softly about his own nightmares, about Lisa, about the guilt that kept him awake at night. "I know you miss him, boy," Marcus had whispered, his hand gently stroking Bruno's fur. "I miss her too, every day. But maybe we can help each other carry this weight." From that night forward, something shifted between them. Bruno began watching Marcus with interest instead of indifference. His tail started wagging occasionally. He began seeking out Marcus's attention rather than avoiding it. Most importantly, he started working with passion again, as if he'd remembered his purpose. Now, 18 months later, they were one of the most effective K-9 units in the department. Bruno's detection skills were unparalleled, and his protective instincts toward Marcus were fierce but controlled. They communicated with glances, moved together like dancers who'd rehearsed the same routine for years, and had developed the kind of trust that made them fearless in dangerous situations. But this morning was different. Bruno had been restless since they'd entered the park, constantly looking toward the duck pond area where families typically gathered. His usual systematic patrol pattern was interrupted by frequent stops, his head tilting as if he were listening to something Marcus couldn't hear. "What is it, buddy?" Marcus asked, following Bruno's gaze toward the benches near the water. "You picking up something I should know about?" Bruno's ears swiveled forward, and he took several steps toward the pond before looking back at Marcus with an expression that seemed almost urgent. This wasn't his normal alert for drugs or weapons. This was something else entirely, something that seemed to pull at him on a level Marcus had never witnessed. The dog's behavior reminded Marcus of the stories Tommy-chan's unit members had shared during Bruno's transition to civilian life. They'd said Bruno had an uncanny ability to sense when someone was in emotional distress, often alerting to soldiers who were struggling with PTSD or depression before they'd even admitted their problems to themselves. The military had called it therapeutic intuition, and several soldiers credited Bruno with saving their lives simply by refusing to leave their sides during dark moments. Marcus had dismissed those stories as military legend, but watching Bruno, now he wondered if there might be more truth to them than he'd believed. The dog was focused on something with the same intensity he showed when tracking explosives, but his body language was different, protective rather than aggressive, concerned rather than threatening. As they approached the pond area, Bruno's pace quickened. Marcus loosened his grip on the leash, trusting his partner's instincts even when he couldn't understand them. Whatever was drawing Bruno forward with such determination, Marcus knew it was important. In 18 months of partnership, Bruno had never led him wrong. The German shepherd's tail was low but not tucked, his ears forward but not flattened signs. That indicated high interest without aggression. Marcus had learned to read these subtle cues like a complex language, and everything about Bruno's posture said he'd found someone who needed help, someone who was hurting in a way that called to the deepest part of his canine soul. As they rounded the corner toward the bench area, Marcus saw what had captured his partner's attention: an elderly woman and a small child, both sitting in positions that spoke of profound sadness. Bruno pulled gently but insistently toward them, and for the first time in months, Marcus felt his partner's tail give the slightest wag. The moment Bruno's eyes locked onto the small figure sitting motionless on the bench, everything else in the park seemed to fade into background noise. The joggers, the distant traffic, Even Marcus's steady breathing, it all became white noise. Compared to the invisible force drawing the German Shepherd forward, with a purpose that defied explanation, Marcus felt the change in his partner immediately. Bruno's usual patrol tension melted away, replaced by something Marcus had only seen once before the night. Bruno had sensed his own breakdown coming and refused to leave his side. The dog's ears weren't pinned back in alertness or forward in aggression. They were positioned in that rare middle ground that meant Bruno was accessing some deeper instinct, something beyond his police training. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, but he loosened his grip on the leash. In 18 months of partnership, he'd learned to trust Bruno's intuition completely, especially when he couldn't understand it himself. Lily sat perfectly still on the weathered park bench, her tiny legs dangling several inches from the ground, her hands folded in her lap with the unnatural stillness that had become her default state. Maria continued scattering breadcrumbs near the pond's edge, stealing worried glances at her granddaughter every few seconds, whispering prayers in Spanish that God might somehow reach through the darkness that had swallowed her little girl whole. Bruno's approach was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. The dog who could detect explosive traces from 50 yards away, who had been trained to subdue fleeing suspects and protect his handler from any threat, now moved with the delicate precision of someone approaching a wounded bird. Each step was measured, careful, as if Bruno understood that whatever was broken in this small child was far more fragile than anything he'd encountered in war zones or crime scenes. 20 feet away, Bruno stopped completely. His brown eyes never left Lily's face, but he made no move to close the remaining distance. Instead, he sat down in the grass and simply waited, as if he knew that crushing this moment would shatter something irreplaceable. Maria noticed the officer and dog. First, her grandmother's protective instincts immediately on high alert. She'd become hypervigilant about strangers since taking guardianship of Lily, suspicious of anyone who showed too much interest in her traumatized granddaughter. She started to wave them away, but something in the dog's posture, patient, respectful, almost reverent, made her hesitate. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Marcus called softly, keeping his distance. Bruno's not usually drawn to people like this. He seems to sense something. He paused, struggling to find words for behavior he'd never seen before. "Would it be okay if we stayed here for a moment? He won't hurt anyone, I promise you that." Maria studied the officer's face, seeing genuine concern rather than idle curiosity. She'd learned to read people quickly over the past 4 months, developed a radar for those who wanted to help versus those who just wanted to stare at the broken little girl and her grieving grandmother. This man's eyes held a familiar shadow, the kind that came from understanding loss personally. Bruno remained motionless in the grass, but his entire being was focused on Lily with laser intensity. It was as if he could see something invisible to human eyes, sense some frequency of pain that only he could detect. His tail wasn't wagging, but it wasn't tucked either. It lay naturally behind him, showing calm alertness without any hint of threat. For the first time in weeks, Lily's head turned slightly. The movement was so small that Maria almost missed it, just a subtle shift that brought the dog into her peripheral vision. But it was movement, and in their world of absolute stillness, any movement felt like a miracle. Bruno's ears twitched forward at her slight motion, but he didn't advance. Instead, he tilted his head in that distinctly canine way that seemed to ask a question. "Are you okay, little one?" The question hung in the air between them, invisible but somehow tangible. Lily's eyes, which had been focused on nothing for so long, began to track toward the patient dog sitting 20 feet away. A journey of her gaze from vacant stare to actual focus seemed to take forever, like watching a flower bloom in extreme slow motion. Marcus held his breath. He'd seen Bruno work with traumatized soldiers, had watched his partner somehow communicate comfort and safety to hardened Marines dealing with PTSD. But this was different. This was a broken child who had retreated so far into herself that even the adults trained to help her were struggling to reach her. When Lily's eyes finally met Bruno's, something electric passed between them. Marcus felt it, Maria gasped softly, and even the pigeons seemed to pause in their eternal search for breadcrumbs. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, it was quiet and profound, like the moment just before sunrise when darkness begins to give way to light. Bruno's tail gave the smallest movement, not quite a wag, but a gentle acknowledgement. His mouth opened slightly in what might have been a smile, his tongue just visible between his teeth. Everything about his body language said, "I see you. I understand. I've been where you are." Lily blinked once, twice, as if she were surfacing from deep water and adjusting to the light. Her hands, which had been folded in her lap for months, like a tiny statue, began to unclasp. One small finger pointed toward Bruno, and though no sound came from her lips, Marcus could swear he saw her mouth form a word. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She abandoned the breadcrumbs and moved closer to the bench, afraid to hope, but unable to look away from what was unfolding before her eyes. Her granddaughter, her silent, unreachable granddaughter, was seeing something, responding to something, connecting with something for the first time since the world had collapsed around them. Bruno seemed to sense the fragility of the moment. He remained perfectly still, letting Lily control the pace of their interaction, offering his presence as a gift rather than forcing connection. In his brown eyes, Marcus saw the same patience Bruno had shown him during his darkest nights, the same unwavering support that had slowly pulled him back from the edge of despair. The air in the park felt charged with possibility, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen when a warrior dog's healing heart met a little girl's broken soul. Time seemed to suspend itself in Memorial Park, as Lily's eyes remained locked on Bruno's gentle gaze. The world around them, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves overhead, the splash of ducks in the pond faded into a hushed silence that felt almost sacred. Even the morning breeze seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself recognized that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Marcus watched his partner with growing amazement. In all their months together, through dangerous raids and high-stress situations, he had never seen Bruno exhibit this level of focused calm. The dog's entire being radiated a peaceful energy that seemed to create an invisible bubble of safety around the little girl on the bench. Bruno's training had prepared him for many things, but this was something deeper, something that came from the soul rather than from any manual or instruction. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs as she witnessed her granddaughter's first genuine response to another living being in 4 months. Lily's tiny finger, still pointing toward Bruno, began to tremble slightly, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like recognition. The vacant stare that had become so familiar was replaced by an intensity Maria hadn't seen since before that terrible night, when their world had shattered. Bruno seemed to understand that he was being invited into something precious and fragile. With movements so slow and deliberate, they appeared choreographed. He lowered himself from sitting to lying down in the grass, making himself less imposing, more approachable. His chin rested on his front paws, but his eyes never left Lily's face. The gesture said everything. "I'm not a threat. I'm just here if you need me." Lily's mouth opened slightly, and Maria's breath caught. She hadn't heard her granddaughter's voice in so long that she'd almost forgotten what it sounded like. That sweet, high pitch that used to fill their house with constant chatter and questions and songs. Now, watching Lily's lips form silent words, Maria felt tears beginning to blur her vision. A jogger slowed his pace as he passed, sensing the intensity of the moment without understanding it. An elderly woman feeding pigeons glanced over, and instinctively moved closer, drawn by the same magnetic pull that seemed to be gathering witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Even the ducks in the pond had gone still, floating silently on the water's surface, as if they too were waiting. Bruno's tail gave the slightest movement against the grass, not a wag, but a gentle flutter that seemed to say, "I understand. Take your time." His ears remained forward, alert but not aggressive, perfectly positioned to catch even the softest sound. Everything about his posture communicated infinite patience, as if he would lie there for hours if necessary, waiting for this broken little girl to find her voice again. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he recognized the expression on Bruno's face. It was the same look his partner had given him during his darkest moments, a combination of empathy, understanding, and unwavering support that seemed to reach directly into the wounded places that words couldn't touch. Bruno wasn't just being patient. He was actively healing, using some innate wisdom that transcended species and spoke directly to pain itself. Lily's hand slowly lifted from her lap. The movement was hesitant, uncertain, like someone testing the temperature of water before diving in. Her small fingers stretched toward Bruno, though 20 feet of space still separated them. The gesture was both heartbreaking and hopeful, a tiny bridge being built across an ocean of silence and grief. Maria wanted to speak, to encourage, to somehow help facilitate this miraculous moment, but instinct told her that any interference might break the spell. This was between Lily and Bruno, a conversation happening in a language that adults couldn't fully comprehend. All she could do was bear witness and pray that whatever was happening would continue. Bruno's response to Lily's reaching hand was to lower his head even further, pressing his muzzle almost to the ground in a gesture of complete submission and respect. His eyes, however, remained fixed on hers, offering comfort and understanding, without demanding anything in return. The message was clear. I see your pain because I carry my own. You're not alone in this darkness. For several more minutes, they stayed frozen in this position, child, reaching toward Dog offering himself as a bridge back to the world of the living. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of communication that happened below. The level of words, a recognition of shared trauma, and the possibility of shared healing. Then, so softly that Marcus almost missed it, came the sound that changed everything. Daddy's dog. The words were barely above a whisper, fragile as spun glass, but they cut through the morning air with the force of a thunderclap. Lily's voice, unused for months, cracked slightly on the second word, but the meaning rang out clear and true, and devastating in its simple perfection. Maria's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the bench beside her granddaughter, tears streaming down her face as months of suppressed emotion poured out in great, shuddering sobs. The elderly woman feeding pigeons dropped her bag of breadcrumbs, her hand flying to her chest. The jogger stopped completely, his own eyes filling with tears at witnessing something so pure and heartbreaking and beautiful. But it was Marcus, who felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Daddy's dog, not just any dog, Daddy's dog. This little girl was seeing something in Bruno that connected her to her father, finding in his patient brown eyes a reflection of the love and protection she had lost. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, understanding for the first time why Bruno had been so determined to reach this child. Somehow, impossibly, his partner had recognized a fellow soul in need of the kind of healing that could only come from unconditional love and perfect understanding. Bruno's tail began to wag gently, respectfully, but with unmistakable joy. His eyes seemed to sparkle with moisture that might have been tears, and when he lifted his head slightly and gave the softest whine of acknowledgement, every person within earshot felt their hearts break and heal simultaneously. 2 words had shattered months of silence and opened a door that everyone had feared might be permanently closed. The breakthrough had begun. "Daddy's dog," Lily repeated, her voice gaining strength with each syllable, as if testing whether the words would break if she spoke them too loudly. The sound of her own voice seemed to surprise her, and she touched her throat gently with her free hand, as if rediscovering that she still possessed the ability to speak. The ripple effect was immediate and unstoppable. Maria's composure, carefully maintained for 4 months of stoic caregiving, completely shattered. She wrapped her arms around her granddaughter and wept with the kind of desperate relief that comes after holding your breath for so long you've forgotten how to exhale. "Mia, mi amor, you spoke," she whispered in Spanish between sobs, her tears falling into Lily's soft brown hair. "You came back to me." Marcus felt his knees go weak as the full impact of what he'd just witnessed hit him. This wasn't just a child speaking after months of silence. This was a miracle unfolding in real time. His vision blurred as he watched Bruno's tail wag harder, the dog somehow understanding that he had accomplished something extraordinary. Marcus had to steady himself against a nearby tree, overwhelmed by the realization that his partner, his broken, healing partner, had just given this family their daughter back. The elderly woman who had been feeding pigeons 20 yards away heard Lily's voice carry across the morning air and found herself openly weeping without understanding why. She didn't know this child's story, didn't know about the months of silence, or the trauma that had stolen her voice. But something in those 2 simple words, the pure innocence and recognition, touched a place in her heart that transcended explanation. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to her husband, who was reading nearby on another bench. "That little girl." She called him Daddy's dog. Her husband looked up from his newspaper, his own eyes immediately focusing on the scene unfolding near the pond. Without knowing the context, he too felt his chest tighten with emotion as he watched the reunion between child, grandmother, and the patient dog who had somehow unlocked what everyone else had failed to reach. A jogger had stopped completely on the path, his morning run forgotten as he wiped tears from his cheeks. Something about the raw emotion in the little girl's voice, the grandmother's relief, and the dog's gentle response spoke to his own memories of loss and healing. He thought of his daughter, safe at home, and felt a profound gratitude for the ordinary moments he often took for granted. 3 mothers pushing strollers had clustered together on the sidewalk, all of them crying as they watched the scene unfold. One whispered to the others, "That grandmother. Look how she's holding that baby. Something terrible must have happened." They didn't need to know the details to understand that they were witnessing something sacred, a family finding their way back to each other. Bruno seemed to understand that he was at the center of something transformative. His approach to Lily became even more careful, as if he sensed that his every movement now carried enormous weight. He crawled forward on his belly, military style, closing the distance between them inch by inch, giving Lily complete control over their interaction. "Daddy's dog," Lily said again, louder this time, and pointed directly at Bruno with more confidence. "You look like Daddy's dog." Maria's heart nearly stopped. She realized that in Lily's traumatized mind, Bruno wasn't just any dog. He represented her father's presence, his protection, his love. The child was seeing in Bruno's uniform partnership with Marcus the same bond her father had shared with his community, a same dedication to protecting and serving. Marcus knelt down beside Bruno, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke to Lily for the first time. "That's right, sweetheart. I'm a police officer, just like your daddy was. And Bruno here, he's my partner. We help people together, just like your daddy did." The validation seemed to unlock something deeper in Lily. She slid down from the bench, her small legs carrying her the remaining few feet to where Bruno lay waiting. Maria held her breath, ready to intervene if needed, but Bruno's response was perfect. He remained completely still, allowing Lily to approach at her own pace. When Lily's tiny hand finally made contact with Bruno's fur, the dog's tail wagged so hard his entire body wiggled with joy. But he kept his head down, letting her pet him without overwhelming her with his enthusiasm. The physical connection seemed to complete a circuit that had been broken for months, and Lily's face, which had been blank and expressionless for so long, broke into the first smile anyone had seen since her world had collapsed. "Soft," she whispered, running her fingers through Bruno's thick coat. "Daddy's dog is so soft." A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the emotional energy radiating from the scene. A maintenance worker had stopped his lawnmower and removed his hat, standing respectfully at a distance. Two teenagers on skateboards had paused, their usual cynicism replaced by something approaching awe as they watched the interaction between girl and dog. Word was already beginning to spread through the park's network of regular visitors. Dog. Walkers were calling out to each other, sharing what they'd witnessed. "The little girl who never talks," one woman explained to another. "She just spoke to that police dog. Called him Daddy's dog." Marcus realized that his radio was crackling with routine calls, but he ignored it completely. This was bigger than any official duty, more important than any call they might receive. He watched as Bruno gently licked Lily's hand, making her giggle, the first laugh Maria had heard from her granddaughter in 4 months. "Thank you," Maria whispered to Marcus, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Marcus shook his head, tears in his eyes. "Don't thank me," he said, looking down at his partner with profound respect. "Thank him. Bruno knew what she needed before any of us did." As if summoned by the energy of the moment, more people continued to arrive. A local news reporter, initially just passing through on her way to another story, found herself transfixed by the scene. She recognized something newsworthy, but also understood that this was bigger than news. This was hope manifesting in the real world. The emotional avalanche that had started with 2 simple words was now affecting dozens of strangers, all of them united by their witness to the miracle of healing, the power of connection, and the extraordinary ability of love to break through even the deepest darkness. Sarah Chun had been a broadcast journalist for 12 years, but nothing in her career had prepared her for what she witnessed at Memorial Park that Tuesday morning. She'd been cutting through the park on her way to cover a routine city council meeting when she noticed the unusual gathering of people, all focused on something near the duck pond. Her journalistic instincts kicked in, but what she found wasn't a news story. It was a miracle unfolding in real time. Standing at the edge of the growing crowd, Sarah watched as a tiny girl with tears still streaking her cheeks whispered to a German Shepherd police dog, "I love you, Daddy's dog. Don't go away." The child's voice was small and fragile, but it carried across the park with the power of thunder. Sarah felt her professional composure crumble as she realized she was witnessing something that would change not just this family, but everyone who heard about it. "Ma'am," Sarah approached Maria gently, her press credentials visible but her demeanor humble. "I'm Sarah Chun from Channel 7. I couldn't help but notice. Would you be comfortable sharing what just happened? Here? I have a feeling this is a story the world needs to hear." Maria looked up from where she sat on the ground next to Lily, who was now lying beside Bruno, with her head resting on his side, while he patiently endured her gentle exploration of his ears and paws. The grandmother's eyes were red from crying, but there was a light in them that hadn't been there an hour ago. "She hasn't spoken in 4 months, Maria said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Not since her father, Officer David Gonzalez, was killed in the line of duty. Today she saw this beautiful dog and called him Daddy's dog." Those were her first words. Sarah's professional training told her to ask follow-up questions, to gather facts and details, but her human heart told her to simply bear witness to the sacred nature of what was happening. She gestured to her cameraman, who had arrived minutes after her initial call and whispered, "This needs to be handled with incredible care. This isn't just news, this is hope." The footage they captured was unlike anything that typically made it to air. There was no dramatic narration, no sensationalized angles. Instead, the camera quietly documented the pure interaction between a healing child and a dog who seemed to understand her pain. When Lily looked directly into the camera and said, "This is Daddy's dog, and he makes me feel safe," there wasn't a dry eye among the crew. Within hours of the story airing on the evening news, Sarah's phone was ringing nonstop. The simple segment just 3 minutes of Lily interacting with Bruno, interspersed with Maria's tearful explanation, had struck a nerve that reached far beyond Phoenix. Social media exploded first. The hashtag #DADYSDog began trending within hours, shared by parents who had lost spouses, children who had experienced trauma, and adults who remembered their own childhood healing experiences with animals. The original news clip was shared thousands of times, each repost accompanied by personal stories of loss, healing, and hope. "This little girl found her voice through a dog's love," wrote one Twitter user whose post was shared 15,000 times. "If that doesn't restore your faith in miracles, I don't know what will." A Facebook post from a military wife resonated with millions. "My husband died overseas 3 years ago, and my son stopped talking for months afterward. Watching this little angel find her voice again through that beautiful dog. I'm sobbing, but also hopeful. Healing comes in the most unexpected ways." The Phoenix Police Department's phone lines were overwhelmed with calls from around the country. Some were from media outlets wanting interviews, but most were from families dealing with trauma who wanted to know if there were therapy dog programs available, if Bruno might be able to help other children, if there was some way to replicate the magic that had happened in the park. Captain Rodriguez, no relation to Marcus, held an impromptu press conference that afternoon with Marcus and Bruno by his side. What Officer Rodriguez and Bruno accomplished today goes beyond their normal duties, the captain explained to the gathered reporters. "This is why we do this job, to serve our community in whatever way we can, including helping a little girl find her voice again." But the story's reach extended far beyond law enforcement circles. Dr. Patricia Morales, Lily's therapist, received calls from colleagues around the world wanting to understand the therapeutic principles at work. What happened today validates everything we know about trauma recovery in children, she explained to a room full of reporters. Sometimes healing doesn't come from traditional therapy. Sometimes it comes from an unexpected connection that reaches the part of a child that words can't touch. The American Kennel Club issued a statement praising Bruno's intuitive response and highlighting the important role dogs play in therapy and healing. Veterans organizations began sharing the story as an example of how service animals can provide comfort that transcends species barriers. Child psychologists started incorporating the video into their training programs as an example of breakthrough moments in trauma recovery. International media picked up the story by evening. The BBC ran a segment titled "The Healing Power of Unconditional Love," while news outlets in Germany, Japan, and Australia featured the story as an example of hope in difficult times. The simple phrase, "Daddy's dog," was translated into dozens of languages, but its emotional impact remained universal. Back in Phoenix, Maria's phone rang continuously with interview requests from major networks. Ellen DeGeneres' producers called, as did Good Morning America and 60 Minutes. Book agents reached out about potential movie rights. But through it all, Maria's focus remained on Lily, who was experiencing her own form of celebrity. "The whole world wants to hear about Daddy's dog," Lily announced to Bruno during their second meeting that day, arranged quickly by the department to allow the continued healing. "Are you famous now?" Bruno's tail wagged as if he understood. "Perfectly, that he had become something larger than himself, a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever lost someone they loved and wondered if they would ever feel whole again. By midnight, the video had been viewed over 2 million times across all platforms. But more importantly, it had sparked a conversation about healing, hope, and the extraordinary ways that love can break through even the deepest darkness. The viral miracle was just beginning. 3 months after that transformative morning in Memorial Park, the relationship between Lily and Bruno had evolved into something that defied simple explanation. What had begun as a miraculous breakthrough had grown into a deep therapeutic bond that was helping heal not just a traumatized little girl, but an entire community still grappling with the loss of Officer David Gonzalez. The Phoenix Police Department had officially designated Bruno as a dual-purpose dog, maintaining his regular patrol duties with Marcus, while also serving as a certified therapy animal. The decision came after weeks of consultation with child psychologists, veterinary behaviorists, and trauma specialists, who all agreed that Bruno's natural intuition and gentle temperament made him uniquely suited for therapeutic work. Dr. Patricia Morales incorporated the twice-weekly visits with Bruno into Lily's formal treatment plan, documenting remarkable progress that she would later present at national psychology conferences. The transformation has been unprecedented, she explained to a room full of colleagues at the American Psychological Association's annual meeting. Lily has gone from complete selective mutism to age-appropriate verbal development in just 12 weeks, largely due to her bond with this extraordinary dog. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, Marcus would arrive at Memorial Park with Bruno, and they would find Lily and Maria waiting on their usual bench. The routine had become sacred to all involved, a scheduled miracle that drew regular observers who came not as gawkers, but as witnesses to the ongoing power of healing. Lily's vocabulary had exploded exponentially. Where once she had struggled to speak even the simplest words, she now chattered constantly to Bruno about everything from the weather to her dreams. "Bruno, do you see those clouds? They look like Daddy's police car," she would say, pointing skyward. "I think Daddy is driving around up there, keeping everyone safe." These conversations about her father marked a crucial breakthrough in her grief processing. For months, Lily had been unable to speak about David at all, as if mentioning him might make his death more real. Now, with Bruno as her confidant, she began sharing memories, asking questions, and slowly building a new understanding of loss and love that could coexist. "Bruno, did you know my daddy?" became one of her favorite questions. "I think you did. I think that's why you found me that day. Daddy sent you to take care of me, didn't he?" Marcus found these conversations both heartbreaking and beautiful. He would watch as Bruno listened intently to every word, his brown eyes focused on Lily's face with the same attention he gave to high-stakes police work. The dog seemed to understand that these talks were as important as any case they'd ever worked on. Maria's own healing journey had accelerated alongside her granddaughter's. Watching Lily emerge from her shell of silence had given Maria permission to process her own grief more openly. She began attending a support group for families of fallen officers, finding strength in sharing her story and hearing others' experiences of loss and recovery. "That dog didn't just give me back my granddaughter," Maria told the support group. "One evening, he gave me hope that we could build a new kind of happiness, different from what we had before, but still real and still beautiful." The therapy sessions with Dr. Morales had evolved too. Where once they had been exercises in trying to coax any response from Lily, they now focused on helping her develop healthy coping mechanisms and emotional vocabulary. Bruno attended these sessions, providing comfort during difficult conversations and serving as a bridge when words failed. "When I miss Daddy really much," Lily explained during one session, "I hug Bruno and he makes the sad feeling smaller. Not gone, but smaller." And that's okay, because Bruno says it's okay to be sad sometimes. Dr. Morales documented these insights carefully, recognizing that Lily was developing emotional intelligence and resilience that would serve her throughout her life. The child was learning that grief wasn't something to overcome, but something to carry with grace, and that healing could coexist with memory. The broader impact of their story continued to ripple outward. The Phoenix Police Department had established a formal therapy dog program, with 3 additional dogs now being trained for similar work. Requests poured in from other cities wanting to replicate their model. Bruno had become the poster dog for law enforcement therapy programs nationwide. But perhaps most remarkably, Bruno himself seemed to have found new purpose and healing through his work with Lily. Marcus noticed that his partner's own trauma symptoms, the occasional nightmares, the hypervigilance in certain situations had diminished significantly since beginning therapy work. It's like helping her helped him process his own losses, Marcus explained to the veterinary behaviorist who was studying their case. He's not just giving comfort, he's receiving it too. They're healing each other. The visits to Memorial Park had also become community events. Other families dealing with trauma began timing their visits to coincide with Lily and Bruno's sessions, creating an informal support network. Children who had experienced their own losses found comfort in watching Lily's progress, seeing proof that healing was possible. 8-year-old Tommy Santos, whose mother had died in a car accident, began bringing drawings to show Bruno and Lily. Bruno helped Lily find her words, he told his father. Maybe he can help me find mine too. The father, seeing his son's first sign of hope in months, broke down crying right there in the park. Sarah Chun continued following the story, producing monthly updates that had become appointment television for viewers across the country. Her latest segment, titled The Healing Continues, showed Lily confidently leading other children in games at the park, Bruno patiently allowing himself to be petted and hugged by dozens of small hands. 3 months ago, this little girl couldn't speak, Sarah narrated over footage of Lily laughing as she ran through sprinklers with Bruno bounding beside her. Today, she's teaching other children that it's possible to be happy again, even after the worst things happen. That's the true miracle of Lily and Bruno. Not just that they found each other, but that they're showing the rest of us how to heal. As the sun set over Memorial Park that Friday evening, Lily sat between Maria and Marcus on the bench, her small hand buried in Bruno's thick fur. Tomorrow is Saturday, she announced happily. That means I get to miss you for only 1 day, Bruno, and then you come back on Tuesday. That's not too long to wait for my daddy's dog. The healing journey was far from over, but every day brought new proof that love, patience, and an extraordinary dog could indeed work miracles. 1 year and 2 days after that life-changing morning in Memorial Park, Lily Gonzalez stood at the podium of the Phoenix Police Department's annual Memorial Day ceremony, her father's posthumous Medal of Valor pinned to her bright yellow dress. The same little girl who had been unable to speak for 4 months now looked out confidently at an audience of over 800 people, including police officers from across the state, city officials, and families who had traveled hundreds of miles to witness this moment. Bruno sat perfectly at attention beside the podium, wearing his dress uniform harness, adorned with commendations from therapy organizations nationwide. His presence wasn't just ceremonial, he was there as Lily's support system, ready to provide comfort if the emotional weight of the moment became too much for her small shoulders to bear. My name is Lily Maria Gonzalez, she began, her clear voice carrying across the hushed crowd through the microphone adjusted to her 4-year-old height. My daddy was Officer David Gonzalez, and he was the bravest person in the whole world. Maria sat in the front row, tears already streaming down her face. Beside her, Marcus Rodriguez watched with pride as his partner maintained his professional composure while clearly understanding the significance of the moment. This was Bruno's moment to recognition for the miracle he had helped create through. Nothing more than patience, love, and an inexplicable ability to reach into the darkest places and offer light. A year ago, I was very sad, and I couldn't talk, Lily continued, her words carefully practiced but delivered with genuine emotion. I missed my daddy so much that all my words went away. But then I met Bruno, and he helped me remember that daddy's love never really goes away. It just changes into different kinds of love. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word from this remarkable little girl who had become a symbol of resilience for the entire law enforcement community. Several officers discreetly wiped their eyes, remembering their own children, and the fragility of the families they left behind every time they put on their uniforms. Captain Martinez stepped forward and presented Lily with a special citation that had been created just for this occasion, the David Gonzalez Memorial Award for Courage in Healing. The plaque read, "Presented to Lily Gonzalez for showing our community that heroes live forever in the hearts of those they love, and that healing is possible even in our darkest moments." But the most meaningful moment came when Lily reached into her small purse and pulled out a handmade collar she had been working on for weeks. The bright blue leather was decorated with patches from police departments across the country, donations that had poured in from officers who had been touched by her story. In careful child's writing, the nameplate read, "Bruno, therapy hero and daddy's dog." "This is for you, Bruno," Lily announced, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Because you helped me find my daddy again. Not the daddy who went to heaven, but the daddy who lives in my heart and makes me brave like him." As she fastened the new collar around Bruno's neck, the German shepherd's tail wagged with dignified joy. He seemed to understand that this moment was as much about his journey as hers, from a broken military dog, grieving his handler, to a healing companion who had found new purpose and service to those who needed him most. The crowd erupted in sustained applause, but it was more than appreciation. It was recognition of something transcendent. Dr. Patricia Morales, who had documented every step of Lily's recovery, later wrote in her case study, "This wasn't just a child overcoming trauma. This was a demonstration of the human spirit's incredible capacity to transform pain into purpose, loss into love, and silence into a voice that would inspire thousands." Sarah Chun, now completing a documentary about Lily and Bruno's story, captured the moment when Lily bent down and whispered something in Bruno's ear that made his tail wag even harder. Later, when Sarah asked what she had said, Lily smiled mysteriously. "I told him that Daddy says thank you for taking such good care of his little girl." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a permanent memorial garden adjacent to Memorial Park. At its center stood a bronze statue of a police officer, kneeling beside a German shepherd, with a small plaque that read, "In memory of all fallen officers and in honor of the healing power of love." Lily and Bruno were given the honor of pulling away the covering cloth, revealing the monument that would stand as a testament to their story for generations to come. As the crowd dispersed and families gathered around the memorial, Lily found herself surrounded by children who had been inspired by her journey. Tommy Santos, the 8-year-old who had lost his mother, now spoke freely about his memories and was thriving in school. Jessica Miller, whose father had been killed in a fire department training accident, brought her own drawings to show Lily. A dozen other children, each carrying their own stories of loss and recovery, formed a circle around Bruno, who patiently accepted their affection with the same gentle wisdom he had shown that first day in the park. "Look, Bruno," Lily said, surveying the scene with mature satisfaction. "We helped them find their voices too." Marcus knelt beside his partner and scratched behind his ears. "You did something incredible, boy. Not just for Lily, but for all of them. You showed everyone that healing doesn't happen alone. It happens when we reach out to each other." when we offer what we have to give, even when we're broken ourselves. As the sun set over Phoenix, casting golden light across the memorial garden, Lily took Bruno's leash and led him back toward the bench where their journey had begun 1 year ago. Maria and Marcus followed, understanding that this moment of return was important, a completion of the circle that had started with 2 words and had grown into a movement. "Daddy's dog," Lily whispered as they reached the bench, just as she had that first morning. But now the words carried different weight, not the desperate recognition of a traumatized child, but the grateful acknowledgement of a little girl who understood that love transcends loss, that healing is possible, and that sometimes the most profound miracles come in the simplest packages. Bruno settled beside the bench with a contented sigh, his new color gleaming in the fading light. Tomorrow there would be more children to comfort, more families to heal, more proof that 2 words spoken from the heart could indeed change the world. But tonight, he was simply Daddy's dog, and that was enough.